Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Mingione. And how are you?
Not too bad. Russell, how are you today?
I'm good. I mean, the Mets won last night. That was good. Yesterday, I should say. And, the Knicks beat the Celtics, although I'm just really not a basketball fan. But it was fun to see people.
You're saying you got 2 up on Mike Augello today.
Is that what I was saying? I didn't really think I was saying that.
I mean, that's basically the subtext.
I guess in a roundabout way, sure. Yeah.
The kiddies would call it throwing shade.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah,
Mike Augello. Mike?
I call it being a passive-aggressive jerk, but okay. And as for myself, I will let you know at about 11:30 tonight.
We'll get to that. We do want to send out our condolences to Mark Scheifele and his family for the loss of his father. That was tough. I mean, I don't know if I could have played in a game the way he played, and
it was heroic. Yeah. I mean, it was
heroic.
It was heroic. And we have to obviously, tip our caps and but also obviously, as you stated, offer our condolences. And it's about as tough a situation you can be faced with, and to perform as he performed is commendable. Absolutely commendable.
But we'll talk about that series. Just like a quarterback in the NFL, there was nothing Connor Hellebuck did that made them lose that game. Like Winnipeg has trouble on the road as a team. It's not all Hellebuck. I think we should look at it that way.
We magnify it. That being said, I mean, that's not to say that Hellebuck's performances in round one weren't a big part of their struggles. But in round two, I don't think Hellebuck was the primary thing that you can go, this is why the Winnipeg Jets are off for the summer now.
Right.
And I firmly believe that that's something that Arniel and company have to, when the bright lights are on and you have to go on the road, you need to lock things down. And again, that was my concern coming into the series.
Defensively, but they can't produce offensively.
Right. And that's huge. That being said, you do have to also look at the Dallas Stars and what they are able, from a matchup perspective, Pete DeBoer, what he was able to do when you have the home ice and are able to match up the way you want to match up. But you got to play through that. You have to find, in those circumstances, you have to find a way. So the hope is that this isn't a one-off and Winnipeg kind of, falls back next year.
Yeah, I don't think they're the Sharks. I think they're going to stay around that way because they have the right elements.
Right.
I think they just have to get.
Not having Morrissey either is a big.
No, that was massive.
That's massive. I mean, that's a matchup that you're already kind of fighting with one arm kind of tied behind your back. And you don't get that defense.
I mean, the forward-looking person who wants the Edmonton Oilers not to make the Stanley Cup final would think that the Dallas Stars were the much more difficult team for them to beat, because Winnipeg went through so many challenges. Ehlers getting hurt and then coming back, Morrissey getting hurt, Scheifele with the concussions. I mean, it really, and Hellebuck not playing like Hellebuck during the regular season. So it was a situation where, I mean, I give Winnipeg a ton of credit. Getting past St. Louis when they're down with a second, 1.4 seconds or 0.4 seconds left. I mean, they were sort of playing with house money. The only thing I look for in terms of looking forward for next year, can they get Ehlers signed on a new deal? I believe Kyle Connor.
Want to get Ehlers signed on a new deal? That's the question.
Well, but Russ,
you can't count on them. Like
I know, but Russ, the problem with Winnipeg, as it is with Buffalo and some other markets,
I know what you're going to say,
is getting people to come there. And it's like, if he's willing to stay there, then you also have some. Some ancillary pieces, guys like Brandon Tanev, who they had acquired at the deadline. Do they want to stick around? But they do have some young players coming through the organization, Russ, that you would know more about, like Yeager.
No, they do. Yeah, no, they do. If only there was a player who was kind of like a proven playoff guy who could be clutch, who's from Winnipeg, that could help Winnipeg. If there was only a player like that out there, Mike.
Yeah. Yes. Well,
Jonathan Taves.
I mean, We've heard about
sign with them in the offseason.
I think so. I think it makes too much sense, and having him as a number 3 or number 2 behind Scheifele. Yeah, you have Lowry. I mean, they actually will be really, and that might be the thing if they're strong up the middle. Yeah. Do you or do you want to parlay? And I'm not advocating this because I like Cole Perfetti as a player. If you have this 1, 2, 3 of Scheifele, Lowry, and Taves, and Taves is anywhere close to being what he was, which we can't expect. Maybe he'll be like a 15 to 20 goal scorer instead of being the guy that
I would look at him as almost like if you put him in almost like a Sean Couturier type of role now, where Couturier is now. But for a team like Winnipeg, a Sean Couturier type can make all the difference.
Right. But could you parlay a Perfetti into somebody who could replace Ehlers? Or, you know, I'm saying like, not that they're not sold on them, but, you know, it's sort of like a better fitting piece. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that's up to Kevin.
Do that, but I get your thought process. It's possible.
Yeah.
I do wonder, again, we've had these discussions before with what the situation will be with Gabe Vilardi and whether or not, you know, if the Flyers would have something that might be a match. If the Flyers are sort of, I have the idea that if they think that Vilardi is a center and would be a center for them, do they send off one of their better right wings to account for that loss?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think
in this case, if you lose an Ehlers in this case,
and Vilardi's a restricted free agent, isn't he?
Right.
Yeah, and that's where I've been kind of, when it comes to Vilardi and Philly, seeing them as a possible trade match. Where that might work, where if the Flyers really want to use Vilardi as a center and not as a wing as he's been in Winnipeg, that might be a path that is a possible pathway, because the Flyers do have wings. They have wings in this case that potentially could help them.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question, and we can move over to the Flyers for a minute. You know, with Rick Tocchet there after his press conference, we know they're gonna be looking for centers to upgrade. Like, that's obvious. We could tell. Even if he wasn't going to be the next coach, they were going to try and do that anyhow. So it does make sense.
Yeah, it won't be Elias Pettersson, though.
The big question was asked in the chat, I know, was in terms of with the Flyers, was whether or not, you know, in terms of the coaching situation for Philadelphia too, whether or not they would look at it, you know, if Woodcroft was would he be considering an assistant coaching gig alongside Tocchet?
I don't think he will do it.
I'm doubtful on that in this circumstance. But I know somebody also asked, you know, in terms of Tocchet and whether or not he'll attract free agents, and whether or not this is about 2026. This is not about this past. That being said, that doesn't mean the Flyers don't look to at least.
I know they're going to do something. But I agree, it's 2026 because like it's not all about Tocchet. It's about Tocchet, how the team looks. It's also about what the player that they're looking for, what other opportunities do they have? Because they're always, I said this on another show, like there's 3 things players look for. They look for that warm weather, they look for the most money they can make tax-wise, and then they look at the market and then the team and the market at the same time.
Yeah, I mean,
all those things have to kind of be in alignment or close for like the Flyers to get somebody after, you know, those things are exhausted.
I can't remember if it was Pierre LeBrun or Elliott. But one of them was saying there are probably, with the cap going up and a number of teams that, you know, will have difficulty getting to the cap floor, basically, there could be as many as 15 teams going after the big fish who will talk.
Absolutely.
And if that's the case,
and that's why I say there's a checklist that you have the players go down.
Right.
And teams like, a team like Anaheim, who hires Quenneville, who we'll talk about in a second, hires Quenneville, has a young core group that I think we all think is really good.
Very close.
Seneca probably joins them at some time next year or maybe the year after.
Maybe the year after, yeah.
Along with Carlson and Terry, and you know, and they probably end up trading Zegras because I can't see Zegras playing for Quenneville, and the defensive core that they have, and Dostal, who I think could be a good number 1 down the road. I mean, they need 1 or 2 veterans, and they have tons of cap space. So, I mean, this summer is going to be exciting because of that.
Yeah, it'll be exciting because of that. And, yeah, I think with, you know, we can move to Quenneville. You know, look, everybody is going to get a chance in this league, and when you won cups like he has, it's going to happen. So it's happening. And I think, you know, in Anaheim, he's not going to be under the microscope like he would be in other cities. But then I go back to Mike Babcock. He wasn't going to be under the microscope in Columbus, and sure enough, he did that. I don't think Quenneville's going to fall into the same trap.
Right. Because Quenneville's not as stupid as
guy.
And I would also
not stupid as Babcock.
And we also don't have, again, and this is big, and this is a big part of it as well, is that you have quite a few offenses on the part of Mike Babcock.
Yes.
In such a risk. Whereas, again, in Quenneville, you have a big one, but he doesn't have a laundry, but he doesn't have a laundry list of things. Now, but he still knows that at the end of the day, he's going to be under the microscope. You're still in a market that, in Anaheim, that way, you may say it's not it's still an area where that's a major media market at the end of the day. So it's going to get, you're still covered by the LA Times. You're still covered by, everything will be amplified. Everything will still be amplified if he trips up. Yeah. I just didn't see Quenneville as being on that level of Babcock.
No, but
stuff that he did with his own players.
But Ant, there is a different, and I would be surprised if the NHL didn't have some say so here. I had been told that before the Leafs hired Craig Berube last year, they were interested in Quenneville, but the NHL could see Toronto, Quenneville. He'll never hear the end of it. He'll be asked these questions. Right. It'll continue to go on and on and on. Anaheim, he's going to have Eric Stevens and two other reporters being at the games, and then he faces it when he goes on the road, but it's not going to be as vehement. My issue with this whole thing, and I'm not defending Quenneville here because I think keeping his mouth shut because of what happened with Kyle Beach and the whole situation with the Blackhawks in 2010 and sort of that cover up going forward, I think that was something they should be punished for, and he was, but. Where was the hue and cry when Edmonton hired Stan Bowman? They cleared him. He got hired. I think he answered one or two questions at the press conference, and everything was honky dory. There's such a friggin' double standard here.
And I will say this though, there was definitely maybe not the major media level. And I'll have to go look at that in this circumstance. I know from. The independent press, bloggers, that twice. There was definitely heat put on, but again, if you're not hearing it from the major media, the mainstream media, I guess you could say in this circumstance, then that hue and cry begins to kind of die off in that case. But yeah, it's there is that standard, and again, in many ways, you kind of wonder. Everybody had kind of shared blame in what happened with Kyle Beach. Sure. The question is again, I guess. How do teams view who's closer to the situation and what was going on than the coach versus the general manager? But the GM at the end of the day, they need to be aware of what's going on with their own team in this circumstance.
And the other concern,
blind eyes were had across the board.
And the other concern, Russ, is and it's the same thing that we've all discussed when it came to like Lindy Ruff. Quenneville's 66 years old. He's been a great coach, but at a certain point, a coach sort of loses touch with what is going on in the game today. And he has been gone, I think it's about a little less than 3 years. It's going to depend a lot on the staff that he brings in. I mean, he's got a young team. Now he had a young team back in, 09, 08, 09, but that's 15 years ago. So that's got to be a concern for Pat Verbeek and the Ducks as well.
Yeah. I mean, he's lucky that the league now still is going back to big and tough and whatever, and he knows how to do that and defense.
The Ducks if you really look at it, it actually matches because the Ducks are building themselves that way, and certain players that they do have, they're looking to. There's a possibility of them shipping off. Yeah, are players that don't necessarily meet that criteria.
Yeah, so, Mason McTavish is a Quenneville type player.
Exactly, which is why I keep hearing people asking about Mason McTavish being available as a restricted free agent. I said he's the quintessential player that the Ducks want to build their identity around.
Right.
If someone puts an offer in on him, they'll match that offer. It'll get matched. So
the other thing I had to do a deep dive on was I really wasn't sure how old the phrase hunky dory was. And it goes back to the 1860s, the Civil War. I had no idea it went back that far.
I can believe it. I'm a historian, Russ. I'm a historian.
That's good. All right.
Stuff you won't get anywhere else, everybody.
That's true. All right. So there is a series that has a home team playing a game 7, and they're the underdog.
There we go.
You almost wouldn't find that in any other sport. Like, they're not just a little underdog. Like, Florida is like minus 130. Like, so I would say bettors are the same as Mike in lack of faith.
Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. This team is a bunch of choke artists. Now, if they win tonight, then they're not. But honestly, I mean, I said
one game. If they win one game 7, they're not choke artists forever.
Come on, Mike. Okay. Put up the sign. Put up the sign. I dare you.
I
put it up. Come on.
I put it away until.
You're such a coward.
Yeah. Okay. Coward. Yes, thank you. But here's the thing. It's like, and I wrote this for Hockey Hot Stove before Game 6 on Friday. I said, what could be the most excruciating fashion that the Maple Leafs could lose? And that is winning Game 6 in Florida, bringing it back to Scotiabank Arena, laying an egg in Game 7. You have all these people like basically wanting to like go from Maple Leaf Square to the CN Tower to impale themselves on the top of the tower or jump off of it.
They put a wire on you to try and jump from the top of the
Sunday
tower.
morning visual.
You know, it's like tower without the wire.
But you know, because that would be the final dagger in their back, Anthony. It's like, and like again, I hope that doesn't happen. But do I think it's going to happen? 100% I do. So,
I mean,
I love just the way Mike has maneuvered this thing.
I know.
Anyway I go, it's going to be good for me.
Right.
Because if they win, I'm happy to see that this group finally got through.
Yes.
If they lose, Mike gets to drop the I told you so's all summer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What a coward you are.
It's called positioning, Anthony. It's
called hedging your bets.
No. It's not hedging my bet because I expect them to choke. I mean, what they did on Friday was impressive. They played a almost perfect road.
They played a Baruch game. They actually played the game that they looked like St. Louis against Boston.
They blocked
in Game 7. The problem is they got to come back home because that's one of the big issues here.
They blocked 31 shots on goal. They Wall didn't have to be great because he only faced 22 shots, but he made the save when he needed to. Mm-hmm. You had Max Domi buying in, playing defensive hockey and making 2 or 3 really nice plays in the defensive zone. It's like, gee, the defensive zone. When have I seen that before? Never. Like Bobby McMahon had a really good game, and you got
the Leafs are 12 and 15.
Can they bring that mentality
one
more time?
And I think one of the more important things, not that one player makes a team, but their best forward, their most consistent forward in the playoffs and in this round has been Matthew Nyes. And Matthew Nyes.
And he's playing.
Well, we don't know whether he's going to be available for Game 7. He might be available, but play on a lower line. They may elevate Russ's favorite player, Max Pacioretty, who's been a big guy for them in this series.
He's been mostly good. He has.
Yeah. So that's a concern. And then all that to the side, you've got Florida. There are a bunch of assassins.
This is Game 7, especially on the road. They've won Game 7s on the road. This is as tough as it gets. It is.
The Leafs are 12 and 15 all time in Game 7. I looked it up, just curiosity. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not terrible. It's just
I look at that. I see that, and that's a stat that I don't really kind of blink at.
You don't have to. I'm just throwing it out there.
Russ, we have to separate. I think it was 77 Lanny McDonald Game 7 or 78 Game 7 overtime against the Islanders. It was the last time the Islanders lost before they won their 4 Stanley Cups, I believe. No, they lost to the Rangers in 79. But they lost it. The Leafs won on the road Game 7 against the Islanders. They won Game 7 on the road with Nikolai Borshevsky against Detroit. They won at home against St. Louis in that same magical 93 run. But since then, They did win the game 7 against the Islanders and against the Senators at home in 2002. But since 2002, every deciding game 7 or game 5, like the Columbus series, they've lost. So, it's a fool who would bet on the Leafs tonight. But I think about 5 million people in the GTA and a lot of people around, the hockey world are rooting for them, and including Paul Bissonnette. Paul Bissonnette counteracts PK Subban, whose vehement hatred of his hometown team is so vociferous that it makes me sick to watch.
He doesn't hate LED lights, though. That's obvious. A couple other things. We know that you could tell how injured Austin Matthews was based on how there was nothing on that shot that went in.
Yeah,
there was nothing. Like, he's got one of the hardest shots in the league, and he can't even muster up. So it's probably a back injury. That's
not going to stop. I mean, even if they win, you're jumping right into the game. The next series starts on Tuesday, and Carolina.
Well,
I honestly, Carolina, things may be potentially lining up for them.
Well, Jeff,
I'm not there yet.
But I think things may be lining up.
Our good friend Jeff Merrick, who will be on the show at some point in the next month or so, did say on X that the team that benefited the most from the Leafs extending this to a 7th game is Carolina, because Carolina will get 4 or 5 days of rest and recuperation, and Toronto and Florida will kill each other in this game tonight. So
I would say the worry for the Leafs is Bob has been slowly getting better in this series.
That is true. That has been. I said that at the start of the series.
Well, he needed more shots.
Was not Bob at the beginning of the series, and as the series wore on, and we stopped having the riverboat gambling type of style to the games, and Florida started to play the way they're supposed to. Yeah, they should be the most difficult challenge that the Leafs have to deal with.
Although there was a school of thought that the Matthews goal was a little soft. I mean,
it was a little off. You know what? I think maybe
he was expecting a rocket shot.
Exactly. Yeah. He thought the rocket was coming, and it ended up being a sidewinder.
Well, he did the patented Matthews, pull it into his body, and he shot it through the legs of the defenseman, and it just went through. So, but keys to the Leafs tonight. Obviously, Wall's going to have to play like he did in Game 4 and like he played in Game 6. They're going to have to block a ton of shots. They're going to have to get the lead, because I know that Scotiabank Arena crowd will they'll fall deadly silent if they fall behind, like they did in Game 1, or like they get in Game 5, excuse me. And Mitch Marner will have to show up, which he didn't do again in Game 6. He shuffled the pass to Matthews. That was the extent of his contribution in Game 6.
Better than nothing.
But they need more. They need more from their star player.
They need more than happenstance.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I get that. One little note, because I'm like elbow deep in draft stuff. I did post something on NHLDraftBuzz.com, a little excerpt of something I do every year for like anonymous scout quotes for the EP Ringside. Well, it's not Ringside anymore. Elite Prospects Draft Guide. And so I pulled out an Anton Frondel versus Caleb Denoyer little nugget there, and so people should check it out, because there is a lot of debate in the scouting world about those two, and with teams. Like the one thing, if people do subscribe to Elite Prospects, you'll see that this person talks about a lot of what teams are thinking and saying and whatever, and you don't really hear a ton of that. So it gives good insight.
It doesn't sound like the Islanders are going to deviate from Schaefer, though, Russ. I mean,
probably not.
Yeah, I mean, so the fun begins at 2.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the fun begins, I think, at 2, and especially at 3. But then after that, as I think Haiti, is that his name?
Hadi.
I'm sorry, I apologize for the mispronunciation.
Oh, sorry.
His mentioning of the fact that on a tweet this morning that from 6 to 15. Yes. It could really go anywhere. And
we did our meeting yesterday.
My comment was the Flyers have a chance to put this whole thing in a blender at 6.
Right. I mean, listen, Porter Martone could go at 2, and then when that happens, then there'll be a run on center.
3, or there's a run or there's a run on centers earlier. Or Martone might be further down.
Yeah, I don't think so.
He shouldn't be. He should not.
Teams value size now to the point where they overvalue size.
I think so. And I've been of the opinion in this circumstance that if Martone slips to Philly at 6, you want the podium to take him. I do not care about position at that point. You go.
I mean, it could break like last year where we didn't hear about Seneca going to Anaheim until the day of the draft.
That is true.
But when Russ and I are at the combine in a couple weeks, we'll start to hear like little things. Yeah. And like, I mean, everybody has connected Martone to the Blackhawks. And if you think about it, it makes a ton of sense because they need a young power forward winger.
You have to get past the Sharks to do it, and the Sharks like size too.
But I would not be shocked. I mean, some people I've seen centers going to them. I've seen, and a guy that I could very easily see because from a stylistic standpoint that could balance out from the center position the way Bedard plays is Jake O'Brien. I could see it. I could see O'Brien being the Seneca of this draft where everybody's like, whoa, he's up at 3.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't do it, but yes, it's possible.
I wouldn't, but I'm looking at, in this case, that they're looking at, again, high in the draft, and it tends to be centers, especially in the early areas. That's my concern here is that I think if a center 2 goes off the board at 3, then we're going to have a run.
Well,
Russ very much will determine with that pick if we're going to have a run on centers.
I'm going to answer Randy's question because he says, do I take a chance on McQueen? Like, I'm not picking Randy, but if a team had me picking, I would not pick him in the top 10. It's too much of a risk with the injury. You could Google the injury and see
people
that.
Look at him and think they think physical unicorn. There's a lot of good things about him. Russ,
great things.
Anywhere to me at the Flyers spec, I still think he's too.
It's too early. I wouldn't do it.
Much of a just like a risk pick. And someone you and I both know, Shane Malloy, both of us are in the agreement that conservative is the way you go when you have a top 10 pick.
Here's the interesting thing, and this will sort of pan out as we get closer to the draft. Chicago 3, like I was saying, I mean, if they're set on Martone and then Martone gets picked at 2, is there a possibility, and there's been some whispers out there about them trading down or trading out of the 3rd. I don't think they'll trade out of 3rd overall, but Buffalo at number 9. Buffalo is in a unique position right now where they need to break this playoff string now. That they have enough what they consider top end prospect talent inside the organization, and would they be willing to trade a top 10 pick to a team for a veteran player who has some term left that would help them get over? I think there's a good possibility of that.
Have to be a pretty good player, Mike.
Definitely. It's not going to be like somebody who's like it's not going to be a Marner who's going to free agency.
No.
It's going to be somebody who's got a couple 3 years left in his contract that needs to be moved, or as part of a larger deal. We had Patrick Johnson on the show last Wednesday, and I asked him about Pettersson being traded still. That's still out there. I mean, I don't think it's likely after they traded Miller, but a package would probably be necessary. But that would basically mean Vancouver's in a full-on rebuild, and I don't think they want to go that way.
You send Pettersson out, you're in a rebuild. That's not a good signal to send to Quinn Hughes.
Yeah,
especially when the coach that they just hired.
Right.
Let's be honest. I think is definitely. Is a nod to try to keep Hughes in Vancouver.
Yeah, and Tippett, Philadelphia trading Tippett makes no sense because Tippett's young. They
just have him on a long term. Yeah, and considering what, and I'll go back to what because I believe this was a one-on-one interview between Jackie Spiegel from the Inquirer, one of our guests, and Rick Tocchet, in a one-on-one basically said he thinks that Tippett has another gear to get to, and he's right with regards to that. So to me, I don't think Philadelphia has any interest in shipping off Owen Tippett. Right?
No, they're not going to do that.
They want to. When you look at the Flyers and how their lineup is on the smaller side, you do not deal off.
No, he's one of the bigger, faster guys. You can't
exactly.
I do want to mention this, and this is not a shot at Randy, but it just shows you why you have to be careful about what Mike is suggesting for trades. Remember, in 1990, the Flames made a trade with the Devils. They end up taking Trevor Kidd. The Devils end up taking Marty Brodeur.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Well, I mean, at 20.
What about the famous Phil Housley, Dale Harwachek deal done between Buffalo and Winnipeg? They flipped first round picks. The Sabres, I believe, got the higher pick and got Brad May, and the pick that Winnipeg got, I believe, was Keith Tkachuk. So I mean, we know that in some instances the draft is a crapshoot. So
but nobody does pick swaps anymore.
Right.
Ever since Doug McClain did the pick swap with Columbus, where they and basically they had to be, I forget who had to be the higher of the picks. I think it was Florida had to be the higher of the pick, and you would get the pick swap the next year, except Florida wasn't. They were worse. And so there was no pick swap. So they basically moved up for nothing. And that doesn't happen anymore. But good for Doug McClain. He made that happen.
Well, and we know that top 10 protection came the norm after Brian Burke didn't protect his first round pick in the Kessel deal, and it ended up being Tyler Seguin and then Dougie Hamilton, which was the most brilliant move of Brian Burke's career. Somebody was advocating against that. I don't know who though.
Still don't know. I still don't know why you're not working in the front office, Mike.
So lastly, we still have the Edmonton series here, and we don't. Not lastly, next series.
Yeah,
Edmonton Dallas.
The Western Final is now set. We have a rematch, folks.
Right, and so we should talk about the Western Final. That's where I was getting at. And so we know who Mike's going to pick. Mike will go last because there's no objectivity here. There's nothing.
There is objectivity.
No.
Shut up. There is objectivity.
There's none.
Shut up.
No, there's none.
It's definitely spiced with something, Mike. Let's put it that way.
With realism.
But Anthony and I will talk about it for a minute.
We'll start first. Yes.
Well, I think this will be the better of the two series. I think there's no question about that.
And the potential Stanley Cup champion as well, I think, because the two. Now, between the two, if I'm going purely from roster standpoint in this circumstance, the one thing Edmonton has done is that their stars have come to play in this playoff.
Sure. No question.
And their role players,
Xander Kane, who made a huge difference.
Yes, has made a huge difference, certainly in both of the series in this case. And again, Vegas is a bigger, heavier, deep team that they were able to pretty much handle.
Well, Russ was right in one respect when it came to Vegas. They definitely were slower than they were, but the problem is, I mean, Stone went out and was not anywhere close to being the Stone of a few years ago. Correct. And really, after Eichel, who was their big? They didn't have Marchessault anymore. They weren't getting clutch scoring from something.
They were hoping for William Karlsson.
You hope for a player like Thomas Hertl to be able to.
Riley Smith wasn't going to do much. He had one good goal.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing about Vegas. They're going to have to look at that.
Vegas was just off. I mean, they looked on paper, they looked like a juggernaut.
Yeah,
but we saw it in the Minnesota series. There was something that wasn't. Again, the speed is a big part of it. But then I asked this: the speed is as much not just about playing fast, but also thinking fast. And they just seem to step slow in their decision making. And Edmonton, with their speed and with a really, I thought they dedicated themselves. And again, there was games where Vegas was able to get some points, get some goals on the board. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I thought Edmonton controlled. Pretty much controlled the series. And they're doing it without the guy that I think is one of the key components to that blue line in Mattias Ekholm. They're doing it without him.
He could be back, though.
No,
they said no.
Well, no, they said, okay, Knobloch said the first two games were definitely out. The first two games were definitely out for Pickard as well. But I can't see them going back to Pickard unless Skinner, craps the bed like he has early in the playoffs, and then they have no other option. Then you have a goal.
He may have found it too. That's the thing with Skinner. I mean, one goal he gave up that terrible overtime, the buzzer beater to Riley Smith, and that was like, what the hell is he doing? But then after that he locked in. He has to just stay in that zone.
But I'm going to go against conventional wisdom here, though, and I'm just going to say I am leaning towards Edmonton because this is different for Dallas. Like Winnipeg's a little more predictable offensively than Edmonton is to face. So I think Dallas was able to match up easier against Winnipeg because they kind of know what they're going to do. They know how they're going to score. They're not dynamic offensively. But now you're facing a dynamic offensive team who also can play tough in the crease with a guy like Kane, and I think that's hard to do. I think
Kane and Perry. I mean, they have guys there that can play it heavy.
Well, but right, and see, this is the thing. I think because we know that Edmonton has the advantage in scum buckets when you're talking about Kane and Corey Perry, but Jamie Benn equals that playing field.
Absolutely.
The problem with Jamie Benn is that you always worry about him taking the very visible bad penalty.
Well, and so does Kane.
That ends up sinking the Stars.
So does Kane. Definitely, Kane.
Yeah, but Ben's had moments that were big. I mean, we could do a toss up between the two, but I think Edmonton can probably as a better case scenario of surviving a Kane mistake than Dallas sometimes does with Ben.
Russ, I would be more concerned about what you said about them and their matchup with Edmonton had they not faced Edmonton last year in the playoffs. And last year, Ottinger was clearly gassed. In that
had trouble with Edmonton. He just had.
I think part of it was he was gassed. Second of all, Dallas had gone through Colorado and Vegas, and I'm not saying that the opposition this year was easier, but it was easier. I mean, Winnipeg was, in spite of the fact that they won the President's Trophy and they had probably the hardest.
They were bled white going into that.
Right. They were severely debilitated by injury. So I cut Winnipeg a lot of slack on that. But I look at Dallas, and Dallas is 4 lines deep. Their fourth line, with the Sam Steele on it has been excellent. You got Jamie Benn and you got Sagan playing on the third line. You got Heiskanen back. You got Robertson back. They're rested as well as being close to being healthy. Now they're playing 11-7 because I think they don't want to load too many minutes on Heiskanen. But as the playoffs go along, they may go back to 12-6
once he feels himself. Yeah.
So here's the stat that I think I'm worried about, and that is Stuart Skinner's lifetime save percentage against the Oilers is 870. Against Dallas is 874.
Right.
But if he's going to ride it, like Anthony said, then maybe that negates that. But here's the other thing: Jake Ottinger, while he has a 5-3-1 record in 9 games against the Oilers, his save percentage is only 907. But this has been more mortal against the Oilers.
He's been more mortal, but I'm going to go back to Mike. I think as Jake Ottinger goes in this series, I do think that Ottinger in many ways will be the
random element.
I think Ottinger is very much the X factor. He was not where he needed to be. And Dallas, from a matchup perspective, again, the one thing they have, as Mike said, they are rolling 4 lines right now. Mm-hmm. They have an X factor. They now have an X factor forward in this playoffs in Mikko Rantanen.
Yeah.
That's something they did not have last year. Robertson's going to be back in this circumstance. The one thing I get into my head is psychologically, what happened last year. Yeah. Is it something that weighs on Dallas, or is it something where they say, we got all the motivation in the world right now. We got we got a chance here for revenge, and that ends up being a motivating factor for the Stars.
I will say this because I'm not going to try and pronounce his name, but HJ in the chat room is talking about Thomas Harley being lethal. Harley's been great.
Harley's
everything he want him to be.
They've got 2 number 1 defensemen. It's like Chicago with Keith and Seabrook, where you've got guys who can log. Now, again, Heiskanen is just coming off the injury, so they're not going to load him up with minutes. They're going with 7 defensemen. They're playing Bischel. I mean, so they're keeping the weight off. But Heiskanen is Heiskanen. They pick their spots, and he's
never going to hurt you.
Yeah, I mean,
he's later in the series, game 4. We get around game 4, depending on the scenario too.
Right.
If Dallas has early control of this series, and that's the other thing we have to take into account. Dallas on the road in the playoffs has been
not great.
And Edmonton's going to be a tough place to play, so they really need to take command, and they need to win their home. They need to win their games at home. And
I'm going to take Edmonton. I am. I feel like it's going against everything. I get it. I could look at Dallas all day long and say they should win. They're the better team, but I don't know if they're winning. So I'm
thinking, again, Edmonton does have the X factors. They're playing extremely well right now.
Yeah.
It's a tough one for me. I would have originally said Dallas in 6, all things considered, but I am taking into account the fact that Edmonton's got the 2 highest skilled players in the series, and I do think they make a big difference. I'm going to combine my matchup ideas and a better Jake Ottinger to Dallas in 7.
Vegas's slowness of foot prevented them from doing what I believed they needed to do to beat Edmonton, and that was beat on Draisaitl and McDavid. Those are 2 of the best players in the league. They're going to score. They're going to do everything that they normally do, but you have to wear on them to wear them down deeper in a series, and Vegas didn't do that. They couldn't catch up to them. Dallas can. Dallas has the size and they have the snarl to be able to do it. Now, if they can't do it, then Edmonton will win the series. I agree, but I think that they'll be able to be more effective than Vegas. So I'm going to take Dallas in 7. I think it'll be long and painful for anybody who wants to see Edmonton lose, which I do.
Yeah, I'm going Edmonton in 7, but I'm checking my notes. Mike's never picked Edmonton to win a series, so I'm just pointing that out.
But I've also never picked Toronto to win a series, and I've been right.
All right, that's it. That's it for Off the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.